Gary.
Yes, Menje.
When did we lose our way, Gary? Why is it that we're always trying to save all these brown people in the Middle East and remove dictators and facilitate regime change when we could be doing it in our own backyard?
What do you mean, Menje?
This country used to be about liberty and removing dictators in South America. Now we're just focused on removing dictators in the Middle East. And most Americans can't even point the Middle East on a map. Gary, tell me why we can't send some drones over to Venezuela and have them give liberty to the people there who so desperately need liberty. Ain't that why we joined the CIA in the first place, Gary? To give liberty to brown people?
Menje, you're right. But I got one question for you. If we're in the CIA, then why do we have goofy British accents?
Gary, why don't you piss off?
Welcome everyone to another episode of Bro History, and if you're watching this right now, please do us a favor and like and subscribe, and if I wasn't too lazy, then you should be seeing some type of animation or tutorial of how to subscribe to the channel, because I'm assuming everyone who's watching this has an IQ of 70. You know what I mean? When you see YouTube videos, they always have like tutorials,
like a little arrow pointing down, like right
this
over
is
here.
how you subscribe to channel.
I don't know. Maybe it helps. I'm no one to talk. We only have 59 subscribers.
Well, I mean, we just started, so it's fine.
That's because nobody from the podcast who's like listening to the actual podcast on iTunes is subscribing to the YouTube channel.
Yeah. It's like thousands of listens and no subscribers on YouTube.
Yeah. They're just like, I don't know.
What's wrong with you guys?
That's what I would expect from the people who listen to this, but whatever. I mean, I love you guys anyway. However, I mean, just subscribe. I'll just give you the real deal right now, why I'm asking everyone to subscribe to this channel. So once you get 1,000 subscribers, you can start monetizing your videos, which probably is going to be a moot point anyway, because the content we put out will not be, it will get flagged probably when you try to monetize it.
We don't know that. Yeah.
I mean, some of it will, you know, we talk about political turmoil and war 70% of the time. All of our guests are specialists in that field. So
today's episode is going to be no different.
Yeah. Today's episode is all about just juicy regime change and missiles and anti-aircraft and regime change and what we usually talk about. However, we had some interesting news. So there's a couple of topics I wanted to talk about today. However, I wanted to start off talking about Syria just because we spoke about this. I mean, we've been talking about this since we started this podcast. It's probably been maybe our number one subject matter. Syria.
Yeah.
Syria and Saudi Arabia, probably hand in hand, are the two things that we talked about the most. Maybe that and World War I as well, as far as the history side is concerned. But since we did an episode on the S-300 about 2 months ago or so,
that's right.
I thought it would be I thought we should pick up where we left off, because we were talking about Syria. If they're going to use the S-300, what would be the scenario where they would use an S-300? And people are starting to say, well, they haven't used it yet. Spoiler alert. But people are saying, and I've seen this on Twitter, I've seen this in different articles, well, Syria is not using it because the S-300s are actually ineffective. And I don't think that's true. I think that's completely bullshit. The reason why, I'll give you my how I see it, why I don't think that they're using it. They're not. Well, first of all, they are using the radar system, as far as I know. They're using the S-300 radar system with S-200s, so they are using it to some degree.
Before you continue, in case either our listeners or our viewers didn't actually watch or listen to the episode on the S-300. The S-300 is a Russian-made surface-to-air missile system. It is mobile. It is basically Optimus Prime with missile launchers on its back, and the controversy around this here is that Russia has gifted several of these S-300 systems to Syria, and the implications there are that they would have the defensive power, the defensive deterrence to fend off, airstrikes from NATO members or specifically Israel, and that's what we'll get to in this conversation. But just all you got to know is the S-300 is dope, and it's very, very well lauded in the military tech community as being a very effective missile system. However, some people are not of that opinion also, and I think that's kind of where you were bringing up.
I don't think people are not of that opinion. I think most people who know about military tech or at least who follow it know that S-300s are, I mean, they're on top of the food chain, really. However, but there's a lot of people who are like, oh, I guess they don't know how to use them, or they're not trained properly. Because I mean, it takes a long time to train on these very sophisticated systems.
Of course.
However, I mean, they've been training on it for a while. They've been training on it, I believe. I don't know the exact number, but I think it might have been
since November.
Since November, but I think they've the top guys in the Syrian army who handle the SAM missile systems. I think they've had their hands on it since 2010. I may be wrong. They might have had
the older
access.
versions. Yeah,
they've had access to
a few other different missile launchers, but I think the S-300 specifically are brand new for them. And I mean, I know this because the one article I read was saying that it took them a minute just to change like the language, for all the codes from obviously Russian to I'm guessing Arabic. Syrians speak Arabic, right?
Yes.
Yeah, like it took them a minute just to get that changed up. But that's all good now.
Well, what I was saying is I think they're not using it is because there's no reason to use it right now. The S-200s they have are more than capable of taking out the missiles that Israel is shooting at pretty much arbitrary targets right now. They're not trying to shoot down planes right now. They're not trying to shoot down ballistic missiles. That's what the S-300 is for. It's for shooting down very high priority targets, and it's just really not worth using it yet. It's more of a deterrent. It's like a nuke of defense. It's like it's a deterrent weapon. It's really just to show people like, hey, like don't fly in our airspace. Don't do an F-35 attack. Don't do an F-15 attack. Don't do an F-16 attack. Or we'll shoot down your plane and you'll have a dead pilot. So, I mean, that's what they're really for. They're not for shooting down like random missiles that are going to low priority targets.
And I think that's the important part. It's the priority level of the targets, right? So at the moment, I think, like you said, Israel's been engaging in some airstrikes on maybe lesser priority areas, and where they have them hold up right now, it's a little bit further to the north. And if you see, and I read this somewhere, if you see them, by them I mean the Syrians, move the S-300 missile systems farther south, like closer to the Israeli border, then that's when they're planning on tracking and potentially downing Israeli aircraft. Because the further south they are, because the Israeli sorties are going to be coming from the south, the longer of a chance they'll have to track the plane as it goes through Syrian airspace, and the better opportunity it's going to have to hit that plane. Right now, it's situated a little further north. While they certainly could still use it, I think there's a number of factors that play into this. One is training, and I'll address that now. I definitely think that the Syrians on the specific missile system are less trained, and I think that they're slated to be completely done with training from the Russians in February, right? Though I imagine that they can probably use it to some great effect right now. And so that's the one thing. They want to make sure that they're completely right on that, because as you know, they accidentally shot down a Russian plane with a different missile system not too long ago, and that was a mistake. So I'm sure that they're being more cautious about how they use their missile systems. So they need to make sure that they're trained up on it. Another thing is the proximity. I mentioned that already. Where they place those missile systems is important because it allows them a better shot at whatever infringes on their airspace. And frankly, I think that there's a little bit of like pressure from Russia specifically not to fuck it up, because, as we pointed out, this S-300 system is a legitimately, like, on paper, objectively an amazing missile system. And if and the whole power projection, like, that you get out of it, like you said, it's like the nuke of, surface to air missiles. The whole point of that is that people don't want to risk flying into areas that are being protected by S-300 surface to air missiles. If you fuck that up, then the public perception is going to be, hey, these things aren't that bad. We can figure it out. Like, it's worth the risk to fly in, even though they're there. So I think there's a little bit of pressure from Russia, and probably internally, not to mess up the fact that they have a really dope weapon, because if you can't use it properly and you're not well trained on it, you don't want people thinking that it's, it's worth a try. The whole point of these things is to deter attacks, not to be offensive. Does that make sense?
No, that's some great points right there. I agree with you. I think there is a lot of pressure on the Russian side for them not to fuck it up, because if they do fuck it up, then that will just be a green light to bomb the shit out of Damascus for the next,
foreseeable future.
For the very foreseeable future. It looks like, despite what people are saying, I still think the U.S. is leaving. That obviously the attack that happened about a week ago when 5 servicemen died is going to slower that. However, I still do think they are leaving. And once the U.S. leaves, I think Israel right now is trying to get some shots in before the U.S. leaves. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, they're trying, their window of opportunity is closing to take shots on Syria, so they might as well take them now. While the U.S. is still in Syria, northern Syria.
It's like being in prison, like when you're in prison, I don't know about this, but I'm just going to assume when you're in prison, if you're friends with the biggest guy in prison, like, they've got your back, you start taking some shots. If you find out that they're getting out of prison and you're going to be left to your lonesome, you might want to get in those last couple hits before Big Brother leaves. So kind of the same thing.
Yeah, I agree. And Assad's not going anywhere. The war is still effectively over. There's still ISIS pockets around the country. However, they're not going to be there forever. I know that recently, I don't think we haven't talked about this yet, but I know Syria has given Iraq basically like an open invitation to go into Syria and kill ISIS members, Daesh.
Like, they just opened up their borders to that? Yeah,
they're like, if you want to make an attack over the Syrian border, go ahead. It's more than fine, because east Syria, there's like, it's all desert anyway. You know what I mean? Like, the Iraqi Syria borders, no one lives there, so they're like, there's people who live there, but the majority of the population of Syria is in the western part. The eastern part is just desert. So it's not like they're going to be launching missiles at Damascus. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So they might as well just, if they have a shot,
the help.
Go ahead and take the shot if you can. But yeah, they gave them the open invite, and obviously Iraq was probably more than happy to do that. But it's an interesting turn of events. I'm happy to see the war is still kind of winding down, even though there has been some setbacks over the past couple of weeks, obviously with the service
spikes.
Yeah, a couple of spikes, but that's going to happen, man. It's going to happen when you give a timeline. In the words of General McChrystal.
When you let your enemies know what you're doing.
It's almost like it was planned all along. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It was very suspicious to see an attack like that. But, I don't want to go too much into conspiracy theory land. However, if someone was,
we don't have the documents, so
we don't have the actual documents. But it was pretty weird that there was a spike in the violence as soon as the U.S. decided to go. Like, if I'm not a conspiracy kook, however, if you happen to believe that maybe a guy with a briefcase of, or probably not a guy, a guy, but not an American guy. Some guy ran over to a bunch of people with a bunch of guns and money and said, "Hey, let's go cause some shit. The Americans are leaving. We'll see what happens." I mean, I wouldn't blame you for following that story. And when I say guy, I mean like a covert guy who has been sent by the CIA, just to be clear. But I don't believe that. I'm not a conspiracy kook. I'm not a conspiracy kook. So speaking of conspiracies, let's go to our next topic because this is a good segue. So I wanted to talk about Venezuela, and I sent you over the video. Venezuela. I'm from Venezuela. I play baseball.
That's a fan.
I'm here to play baseball. So it was that you saw that awkward video I sent you, right?
Yeah.
Of Mike Pence.
Mike Pence's random Spanish.
Hola.
Hola. I'm Mike Pence.
He couldn't get that far. All he could say was hola. He couldn't say mi amo Miguel
Mike
Pence. If he just broke out.
There was that one line that he said like later on. It was like, you know, we support your right to libertad. It's like, just say liberty, bro. Like, come on, don't Spanglish me.
He should have just he should have done the air quotes. Libertad. Someone get a translator.
Libertad.
That's why you should have hired. This is why we should have elected Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush speaks fluent Spanish.
Yeah, he really does. Yeah, he speaks really good Spanish.
He's in Florida though. He has to.
Yeah, well,
if he didn't
his Spanish is probably better than mine. So.
Yeah, his Spanish is fine, but like if you live in Florida and if you're a governor of Florida and you don't speak Spanish, then
you're gonna lose. Yeah.
Yeah. What are you gonna do? Like, what are you doing? Like, that's
like more than half of your population won't vote for you. Yeah.
The Spanish vote in Florida is different than a lot of other countries. It's more divided between left and right because there's a lot of conservative Hispanic people in Florida.
Yeah, there are,
especially Cubans.
Absolutely. Yep.
So like you gotta capitalize on that. You need to. It's not like you're in Texas, where that will probably be important in the future.
Yeah, no,
not now. Like it wasn't before, but
you know who speaks fluent Spanish too? Beto. Just saying.
Beto.
Does
Ted Cruz speak Spanish?
No. As a matter of fact, Beto O'Rourke challenged Ted Cruz to do a debate in Spanish for the Spanish-speaking like residents of Texas, and he was like, "No, I'm Ted Cruz. I don't speak Spanish."
I just say that I'm Hispanic for the points.
Yeah,
he ran on that. He's like, "Wow, we have two minorities running in the GOP: Ted Cruz, and Marco Rubio." All right. Marco Rubio, yeah, I guess he's Spanish. He's Marco Rubio. He's Cuban.
As is Ted Cruz.
Isn't he Puerto Rican?
No, dude.
It's a weird situation.
Puerto Ricans. We don't want Ted Cruz.
It's a weird situation. I think his mom or his dad was Cuban, but they moved to Canada.
Yeah, no, he was born in Canada.
They moved, but it was a weird situation. But he did not get any of the Latino flavor at all.
No.
None.
Zero. Well, we didn't start this topic to talk about Ted Cruz. We wanted to talk about Venezuela.
Yeah, so I guess. I'm sure most people are aware of this, but Mike Pence, he put up this really, really weird, awkward video. This very weird broadcast of him speaking in Spanish. Well, no, he wasn't speaking in Spanish. He was
Spanglish at best.
Speaking in
Hola, I'm Mike Pence.
Speaking in Spanglish at best. And he was talking about I guess he was encouraging the people of Venezuela to basically overthrow their government. I mean, that's what he was doing.
Yeah.
He was encouraging them to overthrow their government.
It was like a very thinly veiled like threat or suggestion.
I mean, it was an encouragement. It was like, hey guys,
let me express the unwavering support of the United States as you, the people of Venezuela, raise your voices in a call for freedom.
Go kill your government. We have your back. You could put whoever you want as dictator of Venezuela.
No. They want Guaido.
They want Guaido. Yeah, they're recognizing him as the actual president. And can you like think of the nerve on that? Imagine if like France, said we don't recognize Donald Trump as president of the United States.
I'm pretty sure they said that at some point.
We recognize Nancy Pelosi as a president of the United States because that's the equivalent.
Yeah.
If another country said, if they were like, we don't recognize Trump, we recognize Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, that would be the exact equivalent of what we just did at Venezuela.
We would be furious.
We would put sanctions on them like they wouldn't fucking believe.
Yeah. So I got a question for you. Is this the first time the U.S. has launched basically encouraged or launched a coup in Venezuela, or is this like the first time that we're doing something like that? Because I know that Venezuela's been going through some tough times. Like, what's the deal with this?
So the U.S. has had it'd be a shorter list to name the countries in South America that we haven't encouraged or been on the side of a coup. It would be a shorter list. I'm pretty much every single country in South America we have backed one side or another, and at the very least in a civil war, in a coup, in a failed coup. Almost every single country in South America has been under the eye of Sauron from the White House and the foreign policy establishment. Venezuela is a special case. This all really started with the Bush administration. The Bush administration tried to get Hugo Chavez. They try to encourage a coup on him. It didn't end up working out. Hugo Chavez stayed in power, but it's been the policy of the White House to be very aggressive to that regime because it's like basically the same regime.
Just different face.
It's just a different face. Like it's the same socialist regime that they have. So this isn't surprising. It's the second time in the past 15, 16 years that we try to encourage a coup, and we'll see what happens. Really, I don't know. I don't know if they're going to be successful or not. But Venezuela has recently cut diplomatic ties. I didn't even know that they had diplomatic ties with. I didn't know we had diplomatic ties. I know, but I honestly didn't think that we had diplomatic ties with Venezuela. Venezuela was allied with North Korea before before we opened up communications with them. They were like one of the very few countries allied with North Korea.
We have envoys everywhere, with the exception of probably Iran and North Korea. But we've got envoys everywhere. So I'm not surprised that we had them. I'm definitely not surprised that the current president, what's his face from Venezuela, expelled them all. I think he said he gave them like 72 hours to leave. I don't blame him. I mean, I can't speak much to his policy or like what's going on in Venezuela, but like all I keep thinking about is like if some country did that shit to us, we would not be happy. Not at all.
No, we wouldn't at all.
Why is this happening? I mean, like the elephant in the room is like, for those who don't know, Venezuela has a bunch of oil, right? So is this like Saddam Hussein 2.0 where we're just going after the oil? Or, is it because they're socialist and we just don't like that? We don't like their socialism? Why? Why are we doing this?
No, I don't think so. I don't even really think that Saddam Hussein was about oil. I don't think that really any of the regime changes that we participated in were about oil at all. I think it's more just about American hegemony. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it was. At the end of the day, it's a lot cheaper to buy oil than steal oil. Like it would be a lot cheaper.
We produce more oil. We produce more oil than everyone. So
we produce more oil, and our oil exports most of them come from Canada anyway. So
imports.
They come from Canada and Mexico. So we're not really buying oil from Venezuela. And I don't think the U.S. has an interest in buying oil from Venezuela. So I don't really think it has anything to do with oil. And that's a common narrative that comes around when especially in terms of the Middle East. Everyone's like, oh, it's because of oil. Like I hear people who are blaming like the Syria situation on oil. I mean, news guys, Syria
Well,
doesn't
there's
really
the
produce oil.
pipeline issue.
It's the pipeline issue, but there's a lot of things that go into it. Like, of course, the pipeline, and I've actually talked about this narrative a lot, and
Right.
I've kind of used this narrative for my arguments on Syria. However, it's not the only thing. Syria doesn't really produce oil. They produce a little bit of oil in the northern part of the country, really where the Kurds are. But they really just produce enough oil to supply their own energy sector rather than to export it. And they're not major oil producers. So just looking at that, I think it's has a lot more to do with our allies, like what the foreign policy of our allies, as well as just American power in those regions. Usually the dictators that we pick on for regime change are just dictators that who do not cooperate with the American empire. I guess that would be the easiest way to say it. So no, I don't think it is because of oil at all. I just think it's because of an unfriendly regime. And I think the issue is, like, the real issue is when you do things like this, when you publicly come out and you try to encourage a civil war, because that's what they were doing.
Yeah.
And that's
they're trying to pick winners and losers. Yeah.
You're picking winners and losers, and you're trying to encourage a civil war. Just to give you a background on the economic situation in Venezuela, I mean, it's very bad right now. It's a socialist country where the living standard is very low. A couple of months ago, I mean, there's all these types of stories about people eating their dogs and stuff like that.
Right.
So it's not really a good situation economically for them. However, it does not mean that the U.S. should be backing or trying to encourage violence in the country, because that's what it was. I mean, I hate the word dog whistle, but that was not just a dog whistle. That was a blowhorn to saying, hey, like one side or this side right here, we have your back. Just kill that guy. We have your back. Go kill that guy. That's
I mean,
what
they
it was.
didn't specifically say go kill that guy, but they definitely said we support you, not the other guy. And this is like our conversation on like inflammatory rhetoric. It's like they might not explicitly be saying go kill a bunch of people or go start a war, but we'll see what happens. But you keep saying shit like that, keep doing shit like that, and something's gonna pop off.
Well, the issue is, I think the real issue is, though, is that when you do this, when you start encouraging, when you pick a side on a civil war, when you pick a certain faction in the government, especially if those people are not in power, then what you're doing is that you're giving the actual government an excuse to crack down on political discourse.
That's right. Yeah.
That's like the real problem, because now I don't know why, the Maduro, I don't know why the Nicolas Maduro situation. So now Maduro has an extra reason to crack down on his political opponents. So you're going to see people being thrown in jail over the next couple of weeks. You're going to probably see a lot of violence coming from the government in order to crack down a potential coup.
Yeah, a lot of violent suppression of marches and things like that. Yeah.
So I think that's what we're going to see in the future for Venezuela. Just more instability in that region. It kind of reminds me of, like, for example, when Erdogan. There's a rumor about Erdogan, the president of Turkey. The rumor
there are many rumors about Erdogan.
There's many very strange rumors about him, but there's one rumor, one conspiracy. I don't have the documents to prove this, but there is a conspiracy.
The documents right here.
For everyone who's listening and watching, if you don't know who Erdogan is the president of Turkey. A couple of years ago, there was an attempt on his life. There was a military coup to overturn or to change the regime internally. And Erdogan, he escaped with his life. He suppressed the regime and he kept his power. And he, over the next couple of years, there was a lot of crackdown in the political system. A lot of his political opponents were thrown in jail. A lot of dissident journalists were put in jail. Basically, anyone he didn't like was put and thrown in jail. Right now, they're actually trying to extradite Cantor from the Knicks, a player in the Knicks, because he's very critical of the government. Yeah, his father was actually, his parents were thrown in jail. His parents were thrown in jail because they were potential dissidents to the government in Turkey.
Doesn't Turkey also want like some imam in Pennsylvania that we have that like escaped from Turkey.
Yeah.
Didn't they try kidnapping this dude like a bunch of times?
Yeah, it's a weird story. I don't actually have the details on that, but they did try to do something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that. That was crazy.
But Enes Kanter on the Knicks, his parents are... He's from Turkey. He's a European player, but he's been in this country since he was in college. He played for Duke, but he wasn't eligible when he played for Duke, so he never actually played for Duke. He just wore the uniform, but he was a pro after his freshman year anyway. But they're trying to extradite him back to the country so they can throw him in jail. And the other day, this is only a couple days ago, there was a Knicks game in London, and Enes Kanter refused to go to the game because he feared that he would be assassinated if he went to London.
Oh, shit. Shit, that's crazy.
Yeah, he's like, I can't go.
Can't even let him play ball? Like, come on. That's fucked up.
It's a wild situation. But back to Venezuela. It's I don't know what's going to happen. I can't tell you. I don't really have any predictive capabilities right now. I'm a little tired, but
I mean, let's hope for the best.
Let's hope for the best. Let's hope for the best. I think there's going to be violence on the side of Maduro just to put down his political rivals. Now it will just give him the perfect pretext to do so. So I think that's what we're going to see,
and that'll start the vicious cycle. You know, the other side will then take up arms because look at vicious Maduro cracking down violently on his people. So, yeah.
You know, somebody told that to Trump. Like someone was like, Trump, you got like Pompeo was probably bucking Trump over this. He was like, you got to go say something. You got to go say something. You know, say something in Spanish. Maybe get on the people's good side. Show them you know a little Spanish. And he was like, Mike, you don't do anything. You just do it.
Mike, you speak Spanish, right?
Mike,
see?
Yo hablo español.
Good enough. Go. Mike will say it. I don't feel like it.
Let's start a Kickstarter to like help Mike Pence learn Spanish.
It would probably do really well.
Get him some Spanish lessons, maybe like buy him a Duolingo premium account or some shit. Rosetta Stone.
Do you think that the foreign policy establishment has they had an epiphany where they were like, what are we doing, guys? What are we doing? Why are we trying to always overthrow these dictators and free these brown people in the Middle East when we should be doing it in our own backyard like we used to?
Seems like that's the play.
There's so many brown people that need to be liberated in our own backyard in South America. Why are we in the Middle East?
Yeah. Well, pulling out of Syria and going into Venezuela sounds like that sounds plausible.
Listen, we're still going to do regime change, but we're going to keep it in the family from now on. America's only. Because that's what we used to do. I mean, if you look at all the countries that we facilitated some type of coup or regime change in South America, like I said before, you can name more countries. It'd be easier to list the countries that we haven't tried to facilitate a regime change in. Like Brazil, Chile, Argentina, Guatemala, Panama, Venezuela, every country.
All of them.
Guatemala, I think I said Guatemala already. But every country, and basically every single country in South America, we tried at one time or another over the past 70 years, over the past 100 years really, we try to facilitate some type of regime change in almost every single one of those countries. And we've succeeded many times. Many times. So we're going to keep it. We're going back. That's what Trump meant. He said, let's make America great again. Let's do throwback. Let's stop overthrowing dictators in the Middle East. Let's stop freeing brown people in the Middle East. They read scribbly. We should be freeing brown people in our own hemisphere who use the alphabet, who use letters, not scribbly. They'll really succeed. And they're Catholic too. They're Christians.
Reason number 47 why this episode won't be monetized. Right there.
Why? What did I say?
Just cringeworthy, borderline racist. I don't know.
Well,
I think it's funny.
Know what? The good thing I I'm covered with you, Danny, because you cover
Is
me
that
on
why
both
you put me on
sides.
this show?
You're on the side because you are, for everyone who doesn't know, if you're wondering why Danny is so exotic looking, it's not because he's Dothraki, even
I
though he
might be.
dresses like one. He's Arabic. He's
Palestinian specifically. Yeah.
Palestinian, and Puerto Rican.
Yeah.
So
I'm a mutt.
no one could ever. Danny is strategically placed here to make sure that I never called a bigot towards Latino people or Arab people, because he's both. So we're covered. All we need. I'm not going to go any further on this joke.
All right, let's talk about the next thing. I know you wanted to talk about one more.
I was going to say something really fucked up, but I held myself back.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. So another thing in the news today, or this was yesterday actually, but this is something I actually agreed with Trump on. Well, I didn't agree. Trump wasn't actually going to do this. However, there was a House vote to bar U.S. exit from NATO.
Read that. Yeah.
So it was in a 357 to 22 vote on Tuesday. The House of Representatives voted overwhelmingly to pass the NATO Support Act, which expressed congressional support for the alliance and forbids any funding for any move by the U.S. to withdraw from NATO. Now, Trump has stated in the past, he has said things like, why the hell are we in NATO anyway? NATO members are freeloaders. He has threatened to leave NATO. I think that I agreed with him when he said that, by the way. However, I never thought that he would be. I know that you're not going to agree with me on this one, but we can talk about that. But I never thought that Trump would actually, or anyone would let him do that. Like, he wasn't actually going to pull out of NATO. There's just too much overlying interest to stay in NATO, at least for the foreign policy establishment. However, he said some stuff. I think he recognized how much we spend and how much we prop up a lot of these countries in terms of their military budget. And I just wanted to have a conversation about what you thought, and just go over a little bit of the history of NATO, just to add a little bit more context to people who are listening in.
Yeah, I mean, just quick thoughts. Obviously, I fall on the opposite side of the pullout, the NATO Brexit. I don't think it's a smart idea. I do slightly agree with Trump's sentiments when he says that certain countries aren't paying their fair share, because it's true. There are some countries who have pledged to put in a certain percentage of their GDP towards NATO. And like, let's be real, in order for something like NATO to work, there needs to be money and military assets and other resources that gets put in by everybody. We have the big pocketbooks, so obviously we're going to put in the brunt of it, and I don't necessarily think that's wrong. But he has a point. There are many countries that don't put in their fair share, and I think I would urge those countries to hold up their end of the bargain. But pulling out, that's just not a great idea. I think mostly because I don't love that the United States plays the police of the world police thing. I don't love that because it's a single sovereign nation, right? I do think that there are very specific and very few situations in the world where somebody external to the country needs to intervene, like giant humanitarian crisis. I'm talking about things like Darfur, to a large extent when 9/11 happened. I'd maybe make the case for, doing something about Yemen. But there's probably hundreds more that I'm not describing, but there are some situations where external intervention should be exercised, but I don't believe that intervention should be exercised by a sole nation, because there's a whole lot of baggage that comes along with it. There's questions of biases. There's questions of where the interests lie, and frankly, why should any one country shoulder the entire burden of intervening when an intervention is necessary? And so that's for that reason, I think that NATO is a really great tool and should be used for those purposes. And outside of NATO, I mean, NATO was created to fend off the Soviet Union, basically, and the Soviet Union bloc, the Warsaw Pact, all those Soviet bloc countries. That was the opposite part of that. That doesn't exist anymore. Most of those countries are now European Union countries. Its purpose needs to evolve, and I definitely think you can't do business, and you definitely can't do war without allies. And pulling out of NATO is a really easy way to lose allies.
Well, let's just go over the history of NATO real quick.
Sure.
So, what you mentioned that NATO was formed to prevent the threat of the Soviet Union after World War II. So I have a different perspective on that. My perspective is that, I mean, that's part of it. There was three major reasons though that NATO formed after World War II. Number one was the Europeans wanted to keep the Western Europeans wanted to keep the Americans in. Basically, they wanted to keep American aid flowing after the war because all these countries were completely destroyed. They were destroyed. There were famines everywhere. We don't have to.
We did our part to destroy it too. So we don't have to firebombed the shit out of.
Yeah, we don't have to go over the carnage of World War II, but I think everyone gets it.
Yeah.
But all these countries were completely destroyed after the war. So obviously they wanted that U.S. money coming in. They wanted dollars because there was no dollars there, and dollars was the
strongest currency
currency in the world at that time. So they wanted dollars. I think that's the major reason. Number two is because they wanted to keep the Soviets out. But I don't think they wanted to keep. I don't think they thought that the Soviets were ever going to be an actual military threat. I mean, they were a military threat. However, as far as I know, the Soviets weren't really planning on doing anything. They weren't planning on invading Western Europe. The real threat of the Soviet Union came from spreading their ideology, spreading communism to different countries in Europe. Something that's overlooked in Europe after World War II, there was really big communist movements in a couple different countries. There was this really big communist movement in Italy, and there was a very big communist movement in France. And the British and the Americans were like, "Uh-oh, we can't have these countries going communist." There was a coup in Greece that was backed by the Soviet Union as well. So all this added up to wanted to create, I guess, one block to keep to financially link all these countries together, so they wouldn't fall victim to the communist threat of the Soviet Union. But I don't really think it was because of they saw the Soviet Union as a threat that was going to invade Western Europe. I think the military threats that the U.S. was concentrating on after the war wasn't. They were in Asia. They weren't in Western Europe. Like, all of our soldiers were in Asia in the Korean War after that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I definitely think that the economic perspective is a part of it, but I do think that you're downplaying the military portion of it. I mean, the big premise of the Cold War was quite literally arms race, and yeah, I mean, we developed a shit ton of nukes, but it was more than just us. It was, all of the other countries that we were fighting alongside and with, during World War II, being legitimately scared of communism. And yeah, they wanted to quell the threat of communism because all of the communist countries in the communist bloc under the Soviet Union, it's communism, like they're very tight-knit economies, very tight-knit militaries, like it's a one cohesive unit. Whereas, all of the Western countries that were more democratic, they operated individually, with their own sovereignty, and that posed a legitimate military and, to your point, economic threat. But I do think you're downplaying the military portion of it. I mean, a lot of what goes back and forth even to today is just, placement of nuclear weapons or placement of anti surface to air missiles, placement of tanks, placement of troops, like a big tenet of NATO is a mutual defense pact. And what that means is that, attack on one is an attack on all, right? And they wanted to make sure that that was in play because those smaller nations that are right there on the border of the former Soviet Union were at the biggest risk of being invaded. Whether or not Russia was intending to invade Western European nations on their border was irrelevant. What was relevant was making sure that that wasn't an option. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And just take note that after the Warsaw Pact was formed after NATO was formed. The Warsaw Pact was formed in 1954 after the NATO was formed in 1949.
But they were still tightly knit. It was understood that Soviet Union, like communist countries, were already together. They were already a cohesive unit. Warsaw Pact just solidified that in response to NATO.
Yeah. So a problem though I do have with NATO now, and I believe that you're correct on a lot of it. It was there was definitely that was one of the three major pillars, obviously, right. military defense reasons, security reasons for Europe. However, I just think that you got to add the other factors in it with the financial aid that the U.S. was giving them.
That's fair.
As well as just them trying to prevent communism from spreading, the ideological communist movement from spreading, not necessarily the physical brute force of the Red Army. So I think there's just different factors that were playing into it. But regardless of what the reasons were, the U.S. wasn't exactly that picky with who they let in. They let in. It wasn't like they weren't just accepting democracies, and that was one of the major the foreign policy I wouldn't say the establishment, but Truman. The Truman Doctrine is that the U.S. will fight for democracy anywhere in the world.
Right.
That was the basics of the Truman Doctrine. So some of the members that they let into NATO did not have democracies.
So like who's in it, and like which one of those specifically aren't democracies?
So the countries that started the original countries of NATO were Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, the UK, and the US. Now Portugal was a dictatorship. It was ran by Salazar at the time. They tried to get Spain in, which was also a dictatorship that was neutral in World War II. So they tried to get two. They got one. They succeeded with one. And the reason why they were able to get Portugal in, because there were strategic reasons why they got them in. They wanted to put military bases there. Like all the places that they did pick, and this adds to your point, like all the places that the U.S. picked to or that joined NATO were all places that had there were strategic reasons. Like either there were places to put
military reasons.
Yeah,
right.
Like Iceland was supposed to be like a base in the Atlantic for the U.S. in case worst case scenario, like the Soviets invaded Western Europe, and then they could like launch an attack to the U.S. mainland. They would have Iceland, where they'd have like a submarine base there. That's why Iceland's in it. And obviously Turkey is in it because of Turkey's in it for the reason of just putting missiles in Turkey to scare the shit out of the Russians. Another thing I didn't mention about NATO and why it was formed was because they wanted to make sure that Germany was shut down, that Germany would never rise again, because that was a big fear. If you're wondering what happened, everyone, so I'll be honest, I don't record this. I know it looks like a fancy studio right now behind me. This is actually a home studio, and
it's a dungeon.
And right now it's New York City right now, and it is about, I don't know, like 32 degrees outside. So we have a heater in place, and when you put the heater on, we have like a mobile heater to work with our main heater, just because it gets super cold. And what happened was that we had too many things on at once in the living room, and that's where our router is. and the internet shut off. So Danny and I were disconnected in the middle of our conversation. I think I was talking about NATO and some of the countries that we chose to be in NATO. That's where we left off, right?
Yep. You were talking about how some of them were dictators.
Yeah. So some of those countries that we chose to be in NATO were dictators. Specifically, we tried to get Spain in there. We got Portugal in them. They were dictators. So it wasn't exactly about shared democratic values. It was more so just about like who's important. And that goes to your point as well, because you said that it was a military alliance. However, whatever way you want to see it is really moot, though. At the end of the day, the reason why I think that we are justified in leaving NATO at this point is because the big threat of the world at that time, which was supposed to be the Soviet Union, is gone now. It's gone now, and Russia today. Russia has like 6% of the GDP of Western Europe. Like, Russia is not an advanced economy.
But they're an advanced military.
Doesn't matter. Like, they would get, the only thing they really have is they have nukes, and yes, they have a lot of like advanced military technology and stuff like that. However, like, if the world went against Russia, then the world would win. Like, Putin's not dumb, and he's not in any hurry to show any type of aggression towards Western Europe. Expanding NATO, and which we've been doing over the past, since the 80s, we've been expanding NATO closer and closer to the border of Russia, is antagonizing. And it's, expanding to countries like Montenegro and talking about expanding, letting the Ukraine in NATO is almost like a hostile act towards Russia. When you're taking these countries that were formerly, Soviet satellite states and plugging them in NATO, that's almost a hostile move. Like, Russia is not an advanced economy whatsoever. Like, you have to look at Russia. Russia, all they do is import raw goods. They're like an African country, not import Russia. They export their raw materials. They're like an African country. And I don't mean that like disrespect to Africans. I'm just saying, like, this is why their economies are not like knowledge based powerhouse economies, is because all they do is that they export their natural resources, and then they take that money and they buy finished goods with those natural resources. That's what Russia does. They just export oil and other raw materials. They don't make anything in Russia. Except
dope ass airplanes and
yeah, but like all these other
missile
countries,
systems.
the only countries that are buying them are countries like Greece has them.
Hey, look, I mean, I get it. The Soviet Union isn't around anymore, and Russia isn't exactly the economic powerhouse that the Soviet Union was or could have been, so why be in NATO? So if we were using specifically Russia as an example, if, there's a lot of questions about like the Crimea incident, be on whichever side of it you like. There's some tension going on there. If Ukraine was a part of NATO, which, no one's forcing them to be a part of NATO. They're asking to become a part of NATO, the likelihood that Russia or frankly any other country would want to infringe on their sovereignty in any way would be severely diminished, because they'd be a part of a super group of military powers that would come to their aid based on a mutual defense pact, right? So, like, okay, let's say we just gut NATO right now.
Why should Americans or Western Europeans go to war with Russia over the Ukraine? The Ukraine.
I mean that's the question, right? So why would the United States go to war, for, if somebody hit the UK?
There's a difference between the Ukraine.
Why should we?
The Ukraine has first of all, we were involved in a coup in the Ukraine. We installed a sympathetic Nazi supporter in the Ukraine. And a lot of the animosity that's going on between Russia and Ukraine it's the Ukraine's fault. Like the Crimea situation, Crimea used to be part of Russia. They were part of Russia since the 1950s, and they speak Russian there. They voted to succeed to Russia. They voted to not succeed. They voted to join Russia.
I think there are three big reasons why we see relative peace in the world. Really, those three I see are mutually assured destruction. There's enough countries with nukes where nobody wants to use them, and so they tread very lightly when it comes to things that can spark war. The second thing would be the globalization of economies. A lot of people are making money with each other, and therefore they'd prefer not to go to war because that would fuck it up. And the third would be not specifically NATO, but alliances, military alliances between countries, mutual defense pacts, because you wouldn't fuck with one country, no matter how big or how small, simply because of the fact that you don't want to fuck with all the other countries that are in there. It's like a fucking gang, you know? It's a gang. NATO is a gang. NATO is a world gang. When was the last time a sovereign nation attacked a NATO country?
I mean, the last... well, I was about to say something different. I was about to say 9/11, but 9/11 wasn't a sovereign nation. No.
Nope. So, I mean, it's working, you know? You pull that away, and then you pull away one of those three big reasons in my opinion,
I just feel like by expanding
peace.
NATO, you're increasing the chances that the U.S. gets pulled into a war because of another country's stupid actions.
That is a fair point because of the Mutual Defense Pact. Now, where I begrudgingly agree with Trump once again is that other countries should be contributing more to it. What I take from it, my solution isn't pull out, it's encourage other nations to go all in, or to at least go more in. I'd go deeper, not pull out. It's working. Like I said, I mean, it's a really strong point that no sovereign nation has made an attack on any NATO country. And at this point, a lot of the world's economies are, the biggest world economies are in NATO.
Then why doesn't the EU just make their own army then? Just their own European army?
Because that's not the charter of the EU when it was started. NATO was the armed forces, if you will, the joint armed forces of the world. When they created the EU, it wasn't for military purposes; it was for economic purposes. They didn't create that. What you're asking is, and I think I'm getting at the root of the problem here. What you're asking is, pull us out of NATO so we don't have to bother with, other countries' issues, and that's a fair and fine point to have, right? But you would be but your charge to replace NATO with some European army is literally the same thing, just minus us. You just don't want to be a part of the club anymore. Trump just doesn't want to be a part of the club because he feels like we're paying too much and we're not getting a good deal out of it or something like that. But in fact, we are. We might be paying more money into it and we might be very aggressively involved in it. But that price is small in comparison to the fact that there is no global war conflicts, and there hasn't been.
That's the number one argument you can have on your side when you're pro NATO. There hasn't been a war yet. There hasn't been a major conflict yet between major superpowers. But I would argue on the other hand that the reason why there hasn't been a war between the other major superpowers is because there's only one major superpower, the United States.
Right. So if we pull out, then the likelihood that major war between not us happening,
possibly,
I believe, increases.
Possibly, but I don't think there would be war in Europe. I don't think there would be a war in Europe if the U.S. pulled out. I don't think there would be war between Russia and other countries in Europe. I don't think Russia. I don't think
And it just
Russia's
doesn't
the only real
exclusively
threat.
have to be
Is the only real
Russia,
threat, though.
You know, there are other actors.
Who would be considered is the only real threat to Europe, where how
about China?
Europeans see it. Rather, I don't actually think Russia's that big of a threat. However,
I think there's a good reason why they're not that much of a threat. The U.S.
another reason
backing
is
them.
that Russia's economy. Russia doesn't have
We pull out
a first world
That's
economy.
a big reason.
They have a. They're still kind of coming off communism. They're still coming off the fall of the Soviet Union. They export all their natural resources, and they buy imported finished products. Usually when that happens,
and its
you
current
have
president.
a shitty economy. Like when you
look at-
export your raw goods and you buy finished imports, and that never works out.
I'm hearing you. And look, just hear me out on this one. What happens to countries who have downturned economies, but nevertheless have strong military capabilities with sentiments that are rooted in a former glory? I'm talking about Germany here, in between World War I and World War II, downtrodden economy, capacity for military. They brought that back around. And when we look at Russia's being fronted by Vladimir Putin, who was a former KGB, who was a high-ranking official in the Communist Party, who is at the very least suspected of wanting to bring Russia to its former Soviet glory.
So you're saying...
And they have the military capacity to do so. I think... I tend to fall on the side of on the Crimea debate that Russia antagonized that for both economic and military strategic purposes. I think that overlooking that fact is naive. There's more that goes into it, but that was a part of it. And for the purposes of this conversation, if Russia was so downturned and there was no U.S. backing up, someone in Europe or the Ukraine for that matter, it would be more tempting for them to try it.
I don't know. Maybe you're right, Danny. Maybe you're right.
Tempting.
Maybe you're saying that the reason why. Sorry, this fucking siren. Whatever. I'll just talk through it. Son of a bitch.
Woo! Well, my side isn't sirening, so I'll just continue for a bit. I just think that it doesn't have to be just Russia. What I'm saying is that it's working the best against Russia, but the same could apply to any other sovereign nation that decides to cut out a line with NATO members. And that includes NATO members themselves, right? So members of NATO themselves won't be attacking other members of NATO because they're in a mutual defense pact, and they know that would be suicide.
I don't know. Maybe you're right, Danny. So I just want to know what you're saying. So you're saying that the U.S. bolsters NATO up enough where NATO is actually legitimate. So that will prevent any type of aggression from the East. I guess what I'm saying, and that makes sense, but I guess what I'm saying, I just don't see the Russian threat, really. I don't see the Russian threat. You said that the Ukraine was something that was derived out of Russian policy, foreign policy. I think it was actually more so. It was just people speaking Russian language. The Crimea was part of Russia, and they wanted to succeed to Russia. Like I just don't buy that Russia is trying to be aggressive. Like they have an aggressive foreign policy. I just think they feel threatened from the NATO expansion. So we're playing almost like a game of chicken with them now with this NATO expansion. Because the more that we expand NATO out east, the more threatened Russia feels. And I guess what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to paraphrase you, but that expansion of NATO, or just having NATO in general, keeps Russia in check. It prevents.
Keeps Russia or any other sovereign nation outside of Russia and outside of NATO and inside of NATO in check.
The thing is, though,
I think it does both. NATO members aren't fighting each other, and no non-NATO member is thinking about fighting a NATO member, and that encompasses a lot.
Well, I'll never have the
world
chance to be
right
proven
there.
right because the U.S. will never leave NATO. If NATO,
Yeah, because
let's
Nancy
end with
Pelosi
this. But
said
there
no.
was a really funny story, and I don't know. I think this will make you cringe, but this is like, I always have my good Trump, bad Trump moments, and obviously we were shitting on the Trump administration for a good 15 minutes in this podcast. However, there's still these small Trump moments that just make me laugh, and I'm just like, oh my god, this is hilarious. He canceled Nancy Pelosi's trip to Afghanistan.
Yeah, I saw that.
It's so funny. She's
Total
like,
dick
I'm gonna
move,
get
but,
their
like,
trips.
That's fucking hilarious. Yeah. Yeah, it goes further than that. Like, okay, they were like, so you have to get permission to use military, transport to get to, places like Afghanistan if you're in the United States. And that's obviously the safest way to go, right? If I'm a senator from the United States, I don't want to take no regular plane to, some war zone. Like that's a risk, like that's a huge risk. And so, he cut them off because he's the commander in chief and that's his prerogative. He said, no, you can't take my planes. Right. And then he decided someone in his administration decided to out the fact that they were going to take like an economy flight, like a consumer flight out there. And then they were like, well, fuck, now we can't go at all. Cause they try to like post that shit up in secret, like get tickets on JetBlue or some shit like that to Afghanistan.
It's funny because it's
funny.
purely
Annoying,
out of spite,
but funny.
It's nothing else. It's just funny that he did that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And especially like the Nancy Pelosi, who was probably turned into Skeletor at that very moment when that happened. She was like, she was
livid.
Probably
she was livid.
Cussing, if you know what I mean. I don't know. It's funny.
I'd hope that she was.
All right. You want to wrap this
I would
thing
too
up?
on that situation.
I know you got to go. We went on 18 minutes longer than we were supposed to.
Yep.
So, everyone, thank you for joining us today at Bro History. Go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're watching. If you're listening, then go to the YouTube channel and subscribe to it. Even if you don't even go on YouTube. Like I said earlier, just throw us a bone right now. We're trying to build this small YouTube channel to compete with the likes of Jake Paul. PewDiePie. So,
PewDiePie.
It takes a while. I mean, they probably get we have 59 subscribers as we speak. They probably get about 59 subscribers a second. We get about one to two new subscribers, or probably like around 2 to 3 a day since we started this thing on YouTube. Maybe less than that. It kind of goes up and down. There'll be like 4 days where if we don't post something, then there'll be nothing. But if I post something, usually there's a subscriber to follow it. But yeah, go to the YouTube channel if you're listening and subscribe. If you don't go on YouTube at all, also rate the podcast. That stuff helps a lot. We were getting a lot of ratings in a very small period of time. Yeah, like all good ratings in like a
good ratings
3-week period.
Yeah.
We went from like 60 ratings to like 76 ratings in like a 2-week period. So a bunch of people are rating it. I don't know what the hell that we did to make you rate it. Because I think we stopped saying rate it as much. Like we stopped even doing the funny skits that try to promote rating the podcast. I guess it's like the more we ask people to rate stuff, they don't do it.
We'll have to bring that back.
But rate the podcast too. We're trying to get that to like 100 right now.
Don't
we're pretty close.
rate it.
We're at 77, I think, right now. 77 ratings. And thanks for the kind reviews. Most of them are pretty good, but some are bad, but it's fine. You can say whatever you want as long as you rate it and give us honest feedback. You can say that now that we have a YouTube channel, you can go on and call me a doofy retard because you can actually see me, and it will be proof. But you have to go to the YouTube channel if you want to see that. All right, let's wrap this up. I'm blabbering too much, and I'm going to say something stupid soon. I've already been saying stupid stuff. Peace.
All right. Peace out.